Mrs. My sat motionless in the driver's seat of her black Mercedes, both hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2 even though the engine had been off for 11 minutes. Her breath made small ghosts against the cold glass. On the rearview mirror hung a tiny hourglass, no bigger than her thumb, its wooden frame worn smooth at the edges. The sand was falling, white grains slipping through the narrow pinch of glass with a silence so complete it felt like an accusation. She had done this every morning for 3 months. Parked on this same stretch of empty road, 3 blocks from her office, watching sand run from one chamber to the other while the city slept and the letter was in her purse right now. She didn't need to open it. She had memorized every word the first week, then spent the following weeks memorizing the silence that came after. Her daughter had written it 7 years after walking out the front door at 17, slamming it so hard the frame cracked. 7 years of nothing, no calls, no texts, no forwarding address, and then an envelope with a Hanoi postmark and handwriting Mrs. My would have recognized anywhere. The same handwriting that had once labeled jars of starfruit preserves in the kitchen, that had scrawled "I'm sorry" in the dust on her father's casket. Now it carried only 4 sentences: I'm still alive. I have a son. His name is Min. Please don't look for me. Mrs. My's thumb pressed against the purse's leather seam, tracing the outline of the folded paper inside, and her chest tightened with the same ache she felt reading those words the first time. A mother told she is a grandmother, yet forbidden from ever singing a lullaby to the child. Used to leave sticky notes on the refrigerator. Me oi, can you meet mom, I love you. The same handwriting that had written the hourglass birthday card when she was 17, so you remember time doesn't wait for anyone. Mrs. My had not replied. Not yet. Every evening she sat at her desk with a pen and a blank sheet of paper, and every evening she wrote a draft and tore it up and dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. Dear Lynn, too formal. My Lynn, too possessive. I'm sorry, too small. Come home, too demanding. The torn paper piled up like snowdrifts at the bottom of the bin. She had managed billion-dollar negotiations. She had stared down hostile boards and hostile markets and a hostile ex-husband who told her she would never build anything without him. She had built an empire. But she could not write one letter to her own daughter. The hourglass flipped. She reached up and turned it over with a practiced flick of her wrist. She had done it so many times the motion was automatic now. The sand reversed direction and began falling again. 4 minutes. That was how long it took to empty from top to bottom. For minutes of suspended time, this strange ritual she had invented without meaning to, this pocket of stillness before the day demanded she become someone powerful again. Outside the car, winter fog pressed against the windows. The street was empty except for a stray dog nosing through a pile of leaves. In 23 minutes, her assistant would arrive at the office and start the coffee. In 40 minutes, the first meeting would begin. She would sit at the head of the conference table and make decisions that affected hundreds of employees and millions of dollars, and no one in that room would know that their CEO had spent the dawn staring at a child's toy. No one knew about the letter. Not her sister, not her closest friends, not the people who thought they knew everything about her. She had become very good at hiding things over the years. You don't build a company from nothing without learning how to present a version of yourself that the world finds acceptable. The version of Mrs. My that existed in boardrooms was decisive, unflappable, immune to sentiment. The version that sat in this car at 5:47 a.m. was something else entirely, a woman frozen by the terror of being rejected by her only child. The sand kept falling. She watched it and thought about time. 7 years of silence between a mother and daughter. 7 years of holidays spent alone or at business dinners where no one asked about family. 7 years of her daughter growing into a woman she had never met. At 24, Lynn was probably nothing like the angry 17-year-old who had screamed "You don't love me, you only love your work" and disappeared into a taxi. Mrs. My had replayed that sentence more times than she could count. At the time, she had dismissed it as teenage drama. Now she wasn't so sure. What terrified her most was not knowing what Lynn wanted. The letter was full of cautious, careful language. "I've been thinking about you. I wonder how you are. I would like to talk if you're open to it, but it didn't say I forgive you. It didn't say I understand. It didn't say any of the things Mrs. My desperately needed it to say before she could risk a reply. So she had waited. And the waiting had calcified into this morning ritual, this frozen moment that repeated itself day after day without resolution. She picked up the hourglass and held it in her palm. The wood was warm from the car heater. Lynn had bought it at a craft fair when she was 17, back when she still believed her mother could change. "See, the sand only goes one way," she had said, her voice bright with that particular teenage certainty that everything was symbolic. "You can't get it back once it falls. So you have to pay attention." Mrs. My had smiled and thanked her and put it on her desk, where it had gathered dust for years. She only put it in the car after the letter came. She wasn't sure why. Maybe she was trying to pay attention now, finally, when it might already be too late. The sand ran out. The top chamber was empty. She didn't flip it again. Her hand stayed closed around the tiny wooden frame, and for the first time in 3 months, she didn't start the engine and drive to the office. She just sat there, feeling the weight of 7 years pressing down on her chest like the fog pressing against the glass. Somewhere in Hanoi, her daughter was waking up. Somewhere in Hanoi, there was a young woman who had risked rejection to send a letter to a mother who had never once said I was wrong. And somewhere in that letter, there was a sentence Mrs. My had read so many times the paper was soft at the crease. "I don't need you to be perfect, Mom. I just need to know if you're still there." The question hung in the cold air of the car. Mrs. This morning was different. This morning was different because when she flipped the hourglass, something fell out. A small piece of paper, yellowed and brittle at the edges, fluttered onto her lap. The handwriting was hers, younger, more rounded, and she had done it so long ago that the memory had been buried under 20 years of board meetings and quarterly reports and "Hey hat long tin k duk gaovi, jo nuong k noi suthong sang kwakan." Proverbs 3 verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Her own understanding had been right about everything except the one thing that mattered. Lynn. Her daughter's name was Lynn. She was 24 years old. She lived in Delat, and nothing reminded her of the mother who had told her that art was a hobby, not a future. The argument had been spectacular in its cruelty. Mrs. My remembered every word. "You don't love me. You only love your work." And Mrs. My had replied, "I love you enough to make sure you don't starve." The door had slammed. The taxi had pulled away. 7 years had passed. She unfolded the letter again, the one she kept in the glove compartment. Lynn's handwriting was nothing like her own. "Nioi, kan de yamoamoti fong tran noo delat numi muon denzem, kan luancho." No list of grievances that would have given Mrs. My something to argue against, something to defend. Just an open door. Just a daughter who had built a life without her mother and still, impossibly, left room for her to enter. Mrs. My had analyzed that letter the way she analyzed contracts, looking for loopholes, hidden clauses, escape routes. "If you want to come see" was not "I forgive you." "I'm always waiting" was not "I understand why you did what you did." The letter didn't give her the guarantees she needed, so she had done what she always did when the outcome was uncertain: she had waited. She had waited until waiting became a ritual, until the hourglass became a substitute for courage, until she had convinced herself that not deciding was the same as being prudent. But the piece of paper in her hand said otherwise. "Cho nuong knoi suthong sang kwa kan." Her wisdom, the wisdom she had trusted to build an empire, had been the very thing that built a wall between her and her only child. She thought about the last time she had prayed. Really prayed, not the perfunctory blessings at company dinners or the automatic "please let this deal go through" negotiations with a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. The last real prayer had been 20 years ago, when Lynn was 4 and had spiked a fever of 104 degrees. Mrs. My had knelt on the cold tile floor of the bathroom, her daughter burning in her arms, and she had whispered into the steam from the shower, "Xin he jin jukan kan." Please keep my child safe. And God had. Lynn had survived the fever. She had survived adolescence. She had survived a mother who loved her with the ferocity of a woman who thought love meant control. She had survived and she had thrived and she had opened a gallery in a mountain town and she was waiting. God had kept his part of the bargain. It was Mrs. Mai who had walked away. The realization broke something open inside her. Not gently, not the way dawn slowly dissolves the darkness, but violently, like a dam giving way after decades of pressure. She had been waiting for Lynn to say I forgive you. But Lynn had already forgiven her. The letter was the proof, those words scrawled in her daughter's familiar handwriting, not accusing but releasing. The open door was the proof, left ajar like an invitation rather than a barrier. The 7 years of silence were not Lynn's punishment, they were Mrs. Mai's own prison, and she had locked herself inside and thrown away the key. She had not forgiven herself. She had not forgiven herself for choosing work over school plays, for missing the art exhibition where Lynn won first prize, for saying you'll grow out of this phase every time her daughter talked about applying to fine arts programs. The weight of those small betrayals pressed against her chest now, each one a stone she had gathered and carried alone. But Lynn had already set them down. The forgiveness was there, waiting, not earned, simply given. And for the first time, Mrs. Mai realized the door had never been locked from the other side. She could step through it now, if she chose, leaving the prison of her own making behind. For the final, unforgivable words, I love you enough to make sure you don't starve, as if starvation was the only danger, as if a soul couldn't wither from lack of beauty, as if a heart couldn't die from being told that what it loved most was worthless. The tears came without warning. Mrs. Mai was not a woman who cried. She had trained herself out of it the way she had trained herself out of every other vulnerability, by sheer force of will. But the tears came anyway, hot and relentless, streaming down her face and dripping onto the yellowed paper and the crumpled letter and the hourglass that had witnessed her paralysis for 3 months. She cried for the 7 years she had lost. She cried for the 17-year-old girl who had climbed into a taxi with nothing but a backpack and a broken heart. She cried for the 4-year-old with the fever, the one she had promised God she would protect and then, in her own way, had failed. She cried because she was 63 years old and she was terrified and she had never, not once in her entire life, told her daughter the 3 simplest words in the human language, I was wrong. The hourglass sat empty in her lap. The sand had all fallen. She could flip it again, start the cycle over, drive to the office, attend the 9 a.m. meeting, pretend that this morning was like every other morning. The routine was waiting for her like a comfortable chair, worn into the shape of her avoidance. Or she could drive to Dalat. The distance was 300 kilometers. The meeting was in 2 hours. Her assistant had already texted 3 times, Bak Mai, Kuak Hopluk 9H de Sansong. Doi Tak de Den. She had every reason to stay. Every reason to postpone. Every reason to wait for a better moment, a clearer sign, a guarantee that Lynn would welcome her with open arms and not with the cold silence of justified resentment. But the verse from Proverbs was still burning in her mind. Lean not on your own understanding. Her understanding had given her a successful company and an empty home. Her understanding had given her the respect of strangers and the estrangement of her daughter. She didn't even text her assistant back. She just pressed the green call button, and when the voice on the other end said, Bak Mai, Doi Tak de, Mrs. Mai cut her off with words she had never spoken in 20 years of building an empire, cancel everything. I'm not coming in today. There was a pause. The kind of pause that happens when someone has worked for you for 8 years and has never, not once, heard you say the word cancel. Back, are you okay? Mrs. Mai looked at the hourglass in her lap, empty now, the last grains of sand settled at the bottom like a quiet surrender. I'm going to see my daughter. She hung up before the assistant could ask questions. And then, this is the part that still surprises her when she thinks about it, she laughed. Not a bitter laugh. Not the hollow laugh of someone pretending everything is fine. A real laugh, The kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep and forgotten, like finding an old photograph you didn't know you still had. She had just walked away from a meeting worth more money than most people make in a decade. She had just disappointed partners who had flown in from Singapore. She had just done the single most irresponsible thing of her entire professional life. And she felt lighter than she had felt in 7 years. That's the thing about surrender. It feels like death right before it feels like freedom. She didn't pack a bag. She didn't call ahead. She didn't prepare a speech or rehearse what she would say or calculate the odds of Lynn slamming the door in her face. She just got in the Mercedes and started driving. The hourglass still hung from the rearview mirror, but she didn't flip it. For the first time in 3 months, she let it stay empty. The drive to Dalat takes about 5 hours if you take the highway, longer if you wind through the mountain roads the way Mrs. Mai did, because she needed the time. She didn't turn on the radio. She didn't play music. She just drove, and the silence in the car was not the heavy silence of avoidance but the open silence of someone finally ready to listen. And the memories came. Not the painful ones, not at first. First came the good memories, the ones she had buried so deep she had forgotten they existed. Lynn at 4 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a box of crayons, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth in concentration. Ni oi, kan vi nina. The drawing was a stick figure with a giant head and no neck, and Mrs. Mai had taped it to the refrigerator and kept it there for 3 years. She had forgotten that. How had she forgotten that? Then came the harder ones. Lynn at 14, winning first prize in a citywide art competition. Mrs. Mai had sent her assistant to the award ceremony because she had a board meeting she couldn't miss. She had told herself it was fine, Lynn would understand, the work was important, she was building a future for both of them. But when she saw the photograph later, Lynn holding the certificate with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, something had twisted in her chest. She had ignored it. She had gotten very good at ignoring things. And then the final memory, the one she had been running from for 7 years. Lynn at 17, standing in the doorway with a backpack and red-rimmed eyes. Ni chua bao jio hu kan. Mrs. Mai had said what she always said, I just want what's best for you. And Lynn had replied, so quietly that Mrs. Mai almost didn't hear it, no. You want what's best for you. The words had hit her like a slap. And she had done what she always did when she felt attacked, she had attacked back. Fine. Go. But don't expect me to support this fantasy. I love you enough to make sure you don't starve. She had meant it as love. She had genuinely believed it was love. But driving up the mountain road toward Dalat, the pine trees casting long shadows in the afternoon light, she finally understood something that had eluded her for 63 years. Love that controls is not love. It's fear dressed up in love's clothes. The gallery was smaller than she expected. It was tucked away in a narrow alley off the main road, a wooden house with faded blue shutters and a hand-painted sign that read Phong Tran Lin. Mrs. Mai parked the car and sat there for 11 minutes, she counted, her hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her temples. She almost drove away. She almost flipped the hourglass and went back to the life she knew, the life that was predictable and safe and empty. But she thought of the verse from Proverbs that had been burning in her mind all morning, and she thought of the letter Lynn had written 7 years ago, and she thought of all the mornings she had wasted sitting in a parked car, waiting for a sign that had already come. She got out of the car. The bell above the door chimed when she walked in. The gallery smelled of turpentine and linseed oil and something else, something that smelled like Lynn's bedroom when she was a teenager, the faint floral scent of the lotion she used to use. The walls were covered in paintings, landscapes mostly, the misty mountains and terraced rice fields of the highlands, but also portraits, faces of people Mrs. Mai didn't recognize, their expressions caught in moments of quiet vulnerability. And there, at the back of the room, sitting on a wooden stool with her back to the door, was Lynn. She was working on a portrait. Mrs. Mai could see the canvas from where she stood, a woman's face, half-finished, the eyes already painted with a tenderness that made Mrs. Mai's throat tighten. Lynn's hair was longer now, pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing a paint-stained apron over a simple t-shirt. She looked older. She looked like a woman who had built a life with her own hands. The floorboard creaked under Mrs. Mai's foot, and Lynn turned around. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a bridge that had been broken for so long that neither of them knew how to cross it.